is this podcast so cursed? Why do we have to postpone recording like 5 times before we can even get around to it? I just want to talk about music like a nerd for at least an hour. That's so much to ask. It's the only thing that brings me happiness now. I have no friends at all to talk to besides your dumbass.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about an absolutely essential modern prog album from 2005, Francis the Mute by the Mars Volta.
An absolute essential, a very well acclaimed album.
It does have
Maybe
its
not,
detractors, as
maybe
as do
not,
the Mars Volta in general.
yeah, maybe not beloved necessarily, but if if you're pretty much done with like the whole 70s era and you're looking for new stuff, whether that be in this day and age or sometime within the 2000s, Francis the Mute it is an essential. It's one they have to check out at least once, or at least get around to at some point or another.
Oh yeah. I remember listening to this album, I want to say about a year ago, and I didn't get it at all. I didn't even rate it on my Rate Your Music at the time. But eventually I went
You
back
just
to
rate
it.
your music?
So do you.
Yo, 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 yo.
It's better than Album of the Year.
Rate your meme. I give this meme a cringe, and this album is also very. Actually, you know what? I give it uncringe.
Yeah. But anyways, I didn't rate it, I didn't get it, and I didn't really go back to it until a couple months ago, where I ended up buying it on CD just for the heck of it, because even though I didn't really understand it, I knew I wanted to listen to it again, and physically owning it was actually a pretty cool prospect at the time. So I bought it on CD, spun the whole 77-minute album front to
And your
back.
and your brain melted.
It was so captivating, and I just kept listening to it, and I just kept getting more and more obsessed with it. Now this album is in my top 10 in such a short amount of time.
Um, Not to brag or anything, but I'm pretty sure I've known. Okay, I think I've known about this album for a longer period of time than you,
Right.
and maybe before you finally got around to it. I was probably like throwing it around here and there. I was like, "Hey, Vericlus, you should check out this album. It's like some seriously good prog
Yeah.
that I've been into for a while. The Mars Volta is awesome.
Right.
But for me, when not sure how I not sure how I got into it necessarily. I mean, it must have been, man. Have I really known about this album for years? But like, been a fan of like this album in particular for about like 2 years now, and I remember when I first checked it out by myself. I must have been like half asleep, about to go to bed. I did not know what to expect at all from this album. So imagine how I felt getting into the first track, Cygnus Vin-
Cygnus Vismon Cygnus.
Cygnus Vismon Signet. I can never get that right. Imagine how I felt going into the first track, half asleep in bed, like tucked in bed.
Yeah.
You have that very nice, very iconic, in fact, acoustic riff.
Yeah.
The ocean floor is hidden from your viewing lens.
Yeah, the intro movement sarcophagi, and it's super mellow and quiet, and it's very
And then it totally
relaxing.
blows you off your face.
Yeah, it just hard cuts through with a transition to the second movement, umbilical syllables, and it just rocks. It rocks hard.
Totally rapes you raw with this riff, the super heavy riff. And I was like, again, I was hearing the acoustic riff, and my eyes like peeled back,
Yeah,
and I had totally woken up.
yeah.
Um,
I
and
was gonna say maybe you shouldn't say rapes you raw, but considering what the story of this album is about, I'll let it slide. We're gonna get full disclosure for those who don't know about the story of this album. It's very dark, and we're gonna go very in depth into it.
we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah,
But yeah, I will say, I think from that point on, it's not like I didn't get it necessarily,
right.
but the first listen of the first track was enough to like get me fully captivated,
Right.
and I held grip of this album. I never let it go. Um, and yeah, I remember. Yeah, like before we actually get into it, funny story, if you don't mind me sharing it here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like at around the time you were at your peak in obsession with this album in particular.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I went over to the Fantasyland record shop, which is one of my favorite places to go to like buy like old or like used records or CDs.
Yeah.
They had a newly pressed copy of Francis the Mute, and I didn't think about the fact that you were like unhealthily obsessed with this album. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh shit, dude. Oh, dude, I gotta get. Oh, I have to get this. I don't care if it's like
Yeah.
$60 and I really can't afford it. I mean, if I can, I can. If I can't, I can't.
Yeah.
I say I can, but I could. So I got it, and then like that following night, I hit you up on a video call. Oh, and I did also get like two. I got Velvet Underground and Nico on CD, and then White Light, White Heat on vinyl. I showed those off to you first.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Varric, let's guess what I got. All right.
Yeah.
So here's my batch of shit I bought. Got the Banana album on CD here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not peelable, but it's very good to have it finally. White
And
Light, White Heat here,
on
another
pink
classic.
vinyl, White Light, White Heat is on pink vinyl, and I think that's very neat.
Looks like a Jolly Rancher.
Yeah.
But yeah, White Light, White Heat, another one that pretty glad to have now. And lastly, I got Francis the Mute. No way! No, I can't believe you have this. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I was very distraught over the fact that he had a vinyl copy because I was actually at that time I was looking to buy a vinyl copy off of Discogs whenever I had enough money for it. I was planning on saving up and everything, and then when I see that this fucker bought a brand new copy, I was pissed.
I swear I didn't actually get it just to spite you.
I know you say that, and I understand that, but I was still incredibly, extremely jealous.
But you know what else? I don't blame you for not believing me when I say that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Eventually, I'd say like a week or two later, I managed to buy a copy off of Discogs, and we both have the exact same pressing, which is on glow in the dark vinyl, which is super cool.
yes, and now you can stop hating me.
Yes, we are finally even.
Now, to me, like right away,
Mhm.
I mean, Francis the Mute probably is their best album. If I'm being real here, I know that there's also Delouse in the Comatorium. A lot of
Yeah.
people would argue that that's their best. A lot of people would prefer that over Francis the Mute.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe for probably has to do with its structure. Like
Yeah.
I would say Deloused was like it was if Deloused was the Deloused was like that was their debut album. This was just them starting off, and they started off very strong.
Yeah.
And
So
after these,
The Mars Volta were basically reborn like a phoenix from the ashes of the band at the Drive-In, which was a very influential post-hardcore band from the 90s. And once At the Drive-In fell apart, two of their members, Cedric Bixler Zavala and Omar Rodriguez Lopez, formed the Mars Volta. Their first album, Deloused in the Comatorium, is much more structured and has a lot more of that post-hardcore influence still than Francis the Mute. And a lot of people love the hell out of that record, including me. But I do agree with the fact, not the fact, but the opinion that Francis the Mute is their best album by far.
well, I was just gonna say if Deloused in the Comatorium was the setup, then Francis the Mute was the punchline.
Oh
You
yeah,
know what I'm
oh
saying?
yeah, exactly. Like
Like
D-Less in the Comatorium feels like a build up to Francis the Mute after listening to Francis the Mute over and over and over again over the past couple months.
like for the longest time, I actually did think that Deloused and Francis the Mute like they were neck and neck. Like they both went hand in hand.
Right.
Like their brother and sister album. Like there ain't nothing separating either of them.
Yeah.
But now returning to it again, I do think Deloused it is an excellent album.
Yeah.
Like pretty much the entire track listing is incredibly solid.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of very memorable hooks, a lot of very memorable riffs. And they still like throughout their entire catalog, they maintain this like very clean but still very loud and blistering guitar tone,
Yeah,
which which when he goes at it, he goes all over the place, and it's an amazing sound.
yeah,
Of course, you have Cedric's vocals, just these two elements, um, just combining like soup, just amazing mix,
yeah.
um, and just a lot of really cool vocal harmonies. So D-Louse, like overall, really cool.
My only
Although
real gripe with Deloused is that, and this is purely a personal thing, but it was produced by Rick Rubin, which I do not like that man.
dude, fuck Rick Rubin.
Yeah, fuck Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin totally ruined those last two System of a Down albums for me.
Yeah, no kidding. Like, it's his fault that the loudness wars happened.
I mean, thankfully for me, like on Deloused, the like very um like the very muddy production of this album actually isn't that it's not that big of an issue for me on
No,
here.
because Rick Rubin didn't solely produce the album every track. No, Omar had a lot of input as well because Omar and their second guitarist at the time, Jeremy Michael Ward, which we'll get back to him in a second, but both of them also had a lot of input with the production of Deloused, and that definitely helped in its favor. But I can still see those, well, not see, but I can still hear those Rick Rubinisms on the album every now and again.
Right. Now, here's my like one real gripe, and it's actually a major one.
Yeah.
There's one track on this album that I hate with a passion. Like every
This apparatus, right?
everything else on this album, I love. I love every track on this album. Deloused, all of them are at least great.
Yeah.
Like amazing even. But this apparatus must be unearthed is awful.
I
It
never
is
minded it.
it is I think it's a like now that I've returned to it recently, man, it is a really bad song. And I hate to say that about a Mars Volta song from this early era in their career,
Right.
but man, it's like a Mars Volta song gone wrong in every aspect.
Yeah.
I I think like these sort of like guitar solo fills that are just sprinkled throughout are cool, I guess.
Yeah.
But they are not enough to redeem the awful chorus and this awful filter that Cedric puts over his voice.
They like to do that occasionally, is
Right? Yeah,
put
no,
a filter over Cedric's voice.
yeah, no. They put filters like over his voice all the time, but on this track in particular, it sounds jarring and not in a good way, not in any good
Yeah.
way whatsoever. I really hate this song. I'm sorry to say. If you were to just take this track out, you would I wouldn't miss it. Like not at all.
Right.
Um
So I
but,
think we can wrap up our thoughts on Deloused, considering this is a Francis the Mute video. But
right. Yeah,
it would be remiss of us not to at least mention it.
I thought I would just go over that real quick because I'm not
Right.
sure. Like it's probably best that we get around to like just give like a brief rundown of their other albums before we get to Francis the Mute and go like really into it, you know?
Well, yeah.
Like yeah, Deloused overall like incredibly solid.
Yeah.
And then of course there's Amputexture, which is to me really hit or miss.
You're right.
Like
I
long
like
story short,
ambitexture, but yeah, like some songs are way better than the others. Like for example, Tetragrammaton stands really high on ambitexture, and also Day of the Baphomets stands really high. Those are the two biggest highlights for me. But now that I'm thinking back on it, some of the other tracks just don't reach those same soaring heights as those two.
Amputexture to me is definitely like a step down from the previous two albums.
Yeah.
But I think the high points on here are incredibly high. I mean,
Yes.
seriously. Tetragrammaton, it is among like the best Mars Volta songs.
Yeah. I agree.
Um and then there's the actually no, before this there was a live album, Scab Dates, which like it kind of foreshadows what would come later on like the Bedlam and Goliath. So
Right.
Scab Dates and the Bedlam and Goliath are both albums that are musically just they are impenetrable. They are very hard to get into. Like
Borderline borderline cacophonous from what you've told me.
It is pure cacophony.
Okay.
At some points there's something tangible there that you
Yeah.
can latch onto, but for the most part, they're just really hard albums to get into. And I know, like, I kind of like these releases for those reasons,
Yeah.
but I don't want to describe them as like 75 minutes of wankery or like a 75-minute long wank fest.
Like a lot of
Like
people say with like modern prog.
I don't like to describe any progress. I mean, like that whole term, like they could throw that towards any of the '70s stuff,
Yeah.
for that matter. But I don't want to dismiss any sort of prog album as such,
Right.
because I think that's a bit closed minded.
Yeah.
Um,
I like to
but
keep an open
still,
mind with prog as well.
I do think like the best prog albums are the ones that like they like to keep it as complex as they like, while also just just having there be enough to really like latch on to something that really either speaks to you or really sticks with you. I really think that the Mars Volta maintained that balance perfectly on Delouse and Francis the Mute.
Right.
Um, Everything else that would come afterwards, personally, not so much. Um, so yeah, Scab Dates and Bedlam and Goliath, like totally inaccessible. In fact, like I mean, like this kind of shit I'm actually kind of used to by now.
Right.
But like for those who aren't, you definitely want to save those as like the last Mars Volta albums that you listen to.
Yeah.
But
And
then
it's
afterward,
interesting. It's interesting too because after Bedlam and Goliath, we get the two most accessible Mars Volta records with Octahedron and the Tourniquet.
right, Octahedron and Nocturnicate go in the complete opposite direction. They are
Yeah.
very accessible and at a lot of the time like very nice, very pleasant.
Yeah.
Like they sound like the Mars Volta, but they're missing something, you
Right. Right.
know?
Right.
And that's not to say Octahedron has like its highlights. It has some nice ballads and stuff.
Right.
It is, I guess, it's a nice change of pace for them, but overall, it definitely could have turned out better. And Nocturnicate, honestly, it was just kind of boring. I don't really care for it at all. I mean, like I want to say it like it's as psychedelic as some of their other stuff. Like it maintains that level of psychedelia and stuff.
Right.
But man, it doesn't feel nearly as eventful.
Uh huh. And
So what?
so I was gonna say, that's basically our snap thoughts on the rest of the Mars Volta albums. Like we mentioned Deloused pretty in depth because it's a big part of what makes Francis the Mute special. And then the other albums, well, they don't reach the same heights as Deloused or Francis, except for maybe some songs on Amputexture. Like they're still, we should still bring them up at least, and I'm glad we did.
I mean, I will say, like, it's good to. I'm glad I can safely say that, like, during this run, they never put out like an album that's like bad necessarily, you know.
Right.
But like, if you're like by that point, once you've gotten past all those albums and you're still hungry on Mars Volta or Omar and Cedric related content, like again, there is at the drive-in, which yeah, okay, so after at the drive-in, Omar and Cedric would later go on to form the Mars Volta,
Yep.
and the post-hardcore influence on the Mars Volta albums, it is definitely felt like at the drive-in. It like you can basically like feel the Mars Volta start to boil up in at the drive-in, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, their last album before they reformed, Relationship of Command, is genuinely a great listen. I really like Relationship of Command. But
Like it. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Like if you listen to like at the drive-in after hearing all of what the Mars Volta had to offer, like you can start to really see where they got their post-hardcore sensibilities here.
Hmm.
Now personally, I'm not really a big post-hardcore guy. It's not. I've tried. I think Slint's pretty cool, but I mean they're post-rock if anything.
Yeah.
And Relationship of Command, it is a cool album, but like Again, none of this stuff I'm really all that, head over heels for.
We should also mention that if you want more out of the Mars Volta, if you're new and you listen to everything already, yeah, at the drive-in is a good place to also check out. And there's also a whole smorgasbord cavalcade of albums, solo albums made by Omar Rodriguez Lopez, and from what I've heard, a lot of them are very consistent and very good.
A lot of them I think are also really diverse. I'm not totally sure though.
Right?
But I
Because
did hear a bit of Sedise Basante no Buffalo.
yeah,
Dude, I should already like be well experienced with like Spanish language at this point. Um,
that's another thing too. Francis the Mute is like 30% spoken in Spanish in the lyrics.
and it's often quite sexy.
Yes, but we'll make sure we get to that when we get to songs like Elvia.
Yeah. All right, French.
I think we
All
should
right.
I think we should start talking about Francis the Mute now.
So, okay, how exactly are we gonna structure this again? Like, we're
We were
not
gonna
gonna
talk
like.
about we're gonna talk about the songs themselves, and then once we're done with that, after we're done with the song, we'll talk about its story relevance. Because I do want to dive into the story behind this album, like the concept behind it.
I thought we were going to like. I don't want to like divide this up into segments where like we only talk about the story behind the album and each track, and then actually get into the music itself.
Well, I was gonna do that, but the opposite, where we talk about the music first and then the story second.
Are you sure we shouldn't just do like a mix of both?
I
I
mean,
mean,
we
like that
could.
doesn't. We'll just talk about it as we go along,
Yeah,
honestly.
let's just wing let's wing it.
And if there's any path that we haven't, stepped on yet, we'll probably just backtrack maybe.
Yeah,
Because like that's the thing with Francis the Mute.
it's a
It is
lot.
an it is an incredibly dense album despite only being just 5 tracks.
hmm
It's 5 tracks and
Technically
yet
six, but we'll get to that later.
right.
So I think we should start with just one more bit of background for those uninitiated. I mentioned that during the Deloused and the Comatorium sessions, there was a second guitarist for the band, Jeremy Michael Ward. Unfortunately, right before Deloused was released, he died of a heroin overdose, and it was a very tragic and sad moment for the band. But um, eventually, Cedric and Omar discovered a diary that he found because Jeremy Michael Ward, at the time when D-Lost was being recorded, had a side job as a repo man, and he found a diary in the back of a repossessed car, and this diary had was made by somebody who was trying to track down their biological parents, and a lot of the names in that diary, according to the surviving band members, show up in Francis the Mute. So this album was directly inspired by this diary, and the story behind it is basically a weird Frankenstein fusion of the events in the diary and the names in the diary.
Right. Like that whole event that occurs between all of them is pretty much what inspires the story behind this album.
Right. But the first song, Cygnus Bismuth Cygnus, we talked about it earlier, but it starts off very soothing and gentle with an acoustic guitar intro, and the first opening stanza of lyrics during this intro set the stage for the album's story. So
And man,
essentially, this song and the rest of the album are about a man named Vismund Cygnus, who was the product of a failed abortion. And his whole journey throughout this album is to try and find out what happened to his mother and see if he can reconnect with her.
and I also think like each track is actually named after a character, like a main character in the story.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, Cygnus Vismund Cygnus. Um, he's the main character,
He's the protagonist.
right? Um, and I believe Francis the Mute is the name of the mother.
Yes.
And again, like I'm trying not to like get into the story with you without like getting too ahead of ourselves.
hmm
Um, but like Francis, like she's called Francis the Mute on like the album's title.
Yes.
Like she is the mute because she's literally mute
Yes.
because she was molested by a priest in a church.
Some sort of trauma caused her to become mute.
And I mean, all all of it seems to be pointing towards this exact occurrence here.
Yeah. But anyways, so Cygnus Vismet Cygnus has four different movements. There's the opening movement, Sarcophagi, which is the acoustic intro. It immediately like bumps into umbilical syllables with a hard cut, and that whole movement is setting up the beginning of the search for Cygnus's mother. And I will say, the song itself is incredibly like blistering throughout this whole movement. Like the guitars are going nuts. The percussion on Francis the Mute in particular is completely insane, and it's one of the best like drum albums I've heard from that respect.
Dude, musically speaking, like to call this album just progressive rock would not really do it justice because if you actually break it apart, like musically, I mean, it's not just progressive rock. I mean, for one thing, it's incredibly psychedelic, and a bit later on, you have elements of Latin rock
Yes.
and some jazz, like with some saxophones,
Yeah, there's some jazz
and
instruments on this album too.
there's also these ambient passages which like
Which
make up a and like they make up a big portion of like of one or two tracks on the album. No,
yeah, it's a point of contention
three.
for a lot of people. It's a point of contention for a lot of people that there's quite a bit of ambient sections on this album, and a lot of people say if they cut down or shortened the ambient sections, they could have put the unreleased sixth track on this album. But you know, it's not our call. That's what the band wanted to do, and I respect them for that.
Well, that and okay, well look. I would say the ambient passages that are present on there's like a really long one that comes in at the start of Miranda that Ghost just isn't holy anymore.
Yeah, with the
Um
chirping frogs.
there's like a really long, weird one at the very end of Cygnus,
Mm-hmm.
Visman Cygnus,
Yeah.
and this incredibly long, really wobbly, weird one that makes up like 60% of the duration of the
Yeah,
window.
it's the weird atonal organ solo.
And I will say, like that did like, admittedly, well at the start that really turned me off, and well, I mean now that I've heard it several times over, I mean it's not like I love it necessarily.
I think that the
Um,
organ solo on the end of The Widow is by far the lowest point on the album.
well, I still think it's like a cool thing,
Right, but
on the
it can
album.
get grating from time to time when you're just like, okay, I want this to move on so I can get to Elvia and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it's cool if you're experiencing the entire thing,
Yeah,
but when you want to listen to just that actual like verse and chorus and solo of the widow, like the actual
yeah,
content of the music itself, then by that point you might as well just switch on over to the single version of the widow, which doesn't include that at all.
yeah. I want to mention one more thing about Cygnus. That song. Once the movement umbilical syllables is done and over with, there's this really loud sort of like spooky sound that permeates through the guitar noise and the drums, and then it immediately cuts to the next movement.
Wait, hang
Um,
on a second. Wait, I think I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
Wait a minute.
when it gets really reserved and quiet.
Doom,
Yeah,
doom, boom, ba-now,
yeah, and
ba-na-na-now.
the guitar starts to build up this solo during that part. And it just gets louder and louder and more intense and more complex. And then it cuts to Cedric's vocals again. This particular part always gets me. It's so powerful.
Are you talking about the lyrics that come in by that point?
Not just the lyrics, just like Cedric's vocal performance in general. It's just so absolutely powerful. Like he really brings it home in that section.
Oh
Oh yeah, that part's just cool. But
yeah,
like,
it is cool, and then it gets distorted towards the end.
yeah.
I mean, I'm
And
telling
then the
you, there's
chorus
like,
comes back, and then there's that section where it gets really odd, like you said. And then
I mean,
that
I was
and then there's traffic noises, and then it leads into the next song, "The Widow," which is basically this album's single. Um, it's very
if
good.
you can
It's
even,
very
I'm-
accessible compared to the rest of the songs.
I mean, if you can really even like call it a single. I
No,
mean, it's
it
hard.
was released as a single.
Yeah, it technically was a single, but it's not like a radio single or anything like that. Not by any means.
Yeah.
It's
This is
it's
pretty
like,
much the only song I would recommend to people who are not familiar with the Mars Volta.
well, I mean, you could also recommend some songs off of Deloused.
Like Inertiatic ESP. Like I think that's
I'd say,
that's another good one, but you know, the Widow I'd say is probably one of the most accessible Mars Volta songs, but that's not a bad thing. I love this song to death. It's amazing.
hey, you know what? Going back to Cygnus, Visman, Cygnus for 1 second.
Yeah.
Um, I really think that um, like you have like the first like the first or second verse and chorus, and then you get into the softer, quieter bit.
Yeah.
Like that's the moment in which I take a huge like breath.
Yeah.
You know, you're you have the doom doom doom, and
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh my god.
Yeah, because it just grips you throughout the entirety of that first movement.
Well, I mean, it just makes for like a really good breathing point
Yeah.
in that track before it gets right back into the action.
Yeah, because it grabs you by the neck and it does not let go until that moment because it's just so blistering.
Now, how exactly? Okay, musically, how do you think this sort of plays into like the point of the story here of
On the
Francis? The
Widow?
Well, Cygnus, Visman, Cygnus, and also the Widow. Okay, I know that the Widow is. I'm gonna let you take the stage.
Yeah. So Cygnus Bismuth Cygnus is purely a setup piece, introducing our main character, introducing his desires and conflicts, and setting the stage for his journey throughout the rest of the album. I
Mm-hmm.
should also mention, um, Cedric's lyrics are for a lot of Mars Volta stuff, not just Francis the Mute, are incredibly cryptic and vague. But
Yeah, that's probably like, yeah. If there's one thing to take away, it's that lyrically, the lyrics are just very mysterious,
yeah,
very cryptic, and very weird and alien, and they leave so much to the imagination. And
yes,
that's why, if you go through forums or reviews or analyses of the lyrics in the album, you will find over like a dozen different interpretations of the story behind this album.
right. So yeah, Cygnus Bismuth Cygnus is a setup, and the Widow is diving into Cygnus's dark and somewhat disturbing vices. So Cygnus isn't exactly the cleanest character in the world. Not only is he a drug dealer, but he's also a male prostitute. And the character of the
A
Widow
male
is
prostitute? I
yeah,
did
that
not hear about
yeah,
that. I
he's
mean, I
that's part
never
of the
learned about
story.
that.
That's part of the story. He's a male prostitute.
I thought he was just like addicted to heroin.
No, he is addicted to his own product, but he is a drug dealer as well. So
Right.
yeah, he's basically a walking disaster. Anyways, the Widow as a character is somebody that we don't really know that much about, but we know that the Widow really liked Cygnus's services as a male prostitute. It's
Wait a
it's
second.
what?
Okay, so the track is called "The Widow."
Yes.
Wouldn't the widow be Francis the Mute?
No.
Like, okay, if I'm thinking about this, like we don't really get much insight into who Visman's dad is.
We never it's not important and we never find out.
Well, what if some people were to say that it is important?
It's from all the interpretations and my own personal interpretation, Cygnus's dad is never brought up. From what like the Cygnus's dad is one of the priests who abused and molested Francis in the first place. That's all we
Right.
know,
Okay.
and that's all we should know. Anyways, the widow as a person is somebody who really, really likes Cygnus's services as a male prostitute, and as a result, when Cygnus eventually leaves to go into his journey to find his mother, um, he or she, who we don't really know what gender the widow is either, eventually sort of uh, goes mad with the loss and desire. It's represented by the lyrics "I'll never sleep alone." That is from the perspective of the widow.
Dude, even out of like the context of the story, just like those lyrics alone,
Yeah,
like even if you're not totally following along with the story, the lyrics alone, I mean, no matter how you look at them, they're definitely very provocative.
yeah.
'Cause I'll never sleep alone. I mean, it's
It can be inferred that the widow definitely indulges in Cygnus's services by the lyrics. I hear him every night in every pore, and every time he just makes me warm.
Mhm.
And it can be interpolated that Cygnus is a drug dealer from the lyrics. Look at how they flock to him from an isle of open sores. He knows that the taste is such to die for. By the way, that's a beautiful set of lyrics.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyways, the widow isn't super important as it's a pretty small footnote in the overall grand scheme of the story, but it is important because it definitely sets up Cygnus as an extremely flawed person.
Definitely.
And the widow as a song, it's very short, but at least compared to some of the other songs in this album, and we'll get to that, Jesus Christ, but the widow is like 3.5 minutes in total for like the actual song portion. It's short, it's sweet, it's a very affecting song. It has a great guitar solo in it, and Cedric, who delivers a fantastic vocal performance in it. If anything, if you want to get into Francis the Mute but don't want to dive into like the first and the first song or any of the other songs after the Widow, check the Widow out, see if it interests you, and if you're ready to take that plunge, then the rest of the album is open to you.
I'm not sure why you would want to get into the Mars Volta through just one song instead
I
of
think
just
it's the
like a
perfect
full album.
starting point. It's either that or the entirety of D-Louse to start out with.
I definitely view the Mars Volta. I mean, like at least for I mean, this album in particular, like this is an album in which you can't really like take one song out and expect a complete experience. You know what I mean?
Well, the Widow, like I'd say the single version of the Widow at least has that.
Yeah.
At least
Um
compared to the single version of LVL, which is completely butchered compared to the full song. But should we get to Elvia now?
well, I just want to add real quick. Like I'm glad The Widow works as a single,
Yeah,
but clearly that was done for the sake of those people who want something a bit more accessible from them
yeah,
without having to dive into a 77-minute long album.
yeah.
I like 76 or
It's 77. Okay,
um there's
Elvia.
that. And oh, also as for Cedric's vocals,
Yeah,
I love, well, not only are his vocals generally amazing, they're also like really high pitched.
yeah. He has a
um
very high vocal register, and it's awesome to hear.
I wish I could have a falsetto like that,
Yeah, when
but
he belts in his falsetto at certain points in this album, it is insane.
dude, and like I know we'll get to this, but dude, at Cassandra Gemini, dude, he's like an instrument in of himself.
Yeah, he goes nuts on that song, but we'll definitely get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. Now, Elvia Kez. This is the second single. The single version is like 3 or 4 minutes long, but the actual song is like 11 minutes long. And this is probably like my second favorite song on the entire album. I love this song so much.
Hey, you know what?
What? Go ahead.
Um, like if you listen to this album on vinyl,
Yeah,
um, there are 3 discs, and again, like the issue that Vericlus and I both own are Glow in the Dark. But I think what's really cool about them is that once they end, they go into this loop. Well, not a loop. What's it?
it's a locked groove.
A, a locked groove. That's the word. I'm a dumbass. A locked groove, and you actually have this groove at the very start of Elvia that goes.
Yeah, it's a really simple but really funky drum beat, and that's one of my favorite parts of the album is listening to that 40-second bit.
And fortunately, like I'm just so glad to hear that that actually works out really well as a locked groove on the second or first disc. I think that's really really cool.
Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
Elvia. Also, I think musically is also the most Latin rock influenced.
Yeah, like not and I think the juxtaposition in this song is actually really cool. So the verses are sung entirely in Spanish, and the song is a very progressive, rock-oriented tune. But then when it gets to the chorus, it switches to a very Latin sort of club influenced sound in that sort of sense. And instead of the chorus being sung in Spanish, it's sung in English. And I think that juxtaposition is really well done. Because,
You know
if you
what?
what?
I never thought about that.
Yeah, like if you think about it, you'd think that the Latin portions might be sung in Spanish and the rock portions might be sung in English, but the fact that they switched it around is really, really cool.
Well, it's just not really something that I thought about until you brought it up. That is
Yeah.
really cool.
I should mention,
Um,
after the first chorus, the song has a fucking insane, blistering guitar solo, courtesy of John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That is one of my favorite moments on the album. Is
there,
that solo?
dude, there are at least like 8 solos throughout this entire track alone.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. I mean, maybe that's a stretch, but just a bit of hyperbole for you
yeah.
to get the idea across. I won't forget
Who
who
I'm
I'm
looking
looking for.
for. Oh, mother, help me, I'm looking for.
The chorus is definitely
Mm.
really, it's really groovy, but then towards the end, again, another filter is put over it,
Yeah.
and it gets all
It
like
just get
all deep,
like
and it's
with
like,
every chorus, there's an added effect to the chorus.
yeah, but just towards the very end, it's just like,
It's
and
very
it's all like,
warbly.
it's all awkwardly silent, and yeah, all you can hear is this warbly voice. I don't forget
Yeah.
who I'm looking
Yeah.
for.
It just sort of fades out with that really odd vocal filter.
Also, on top of that, with like the whole like Latin club dance feel of the chorus,
Mhm.
like really, if anything, it's like kind of off-putting for an album like this.
Yeah.
Like something about it, like something that you would affiliate with, like danceable Latin type music. When you
Yeah.
hear it on an album like this, it doesn't feel right. But I mean that in the best way possible.
Yeah.
If any of that makes any sense.
Yeah. So, Elvia, absolutely stellar song. I absolutely adore this song. It is by far one of the best, if on the entire album. Um, and right when the song ends, there is a sample of frogs that are native to Puerto Rico, which I'm pretty sure the whole story is based in Puerto Rico. But these Puerto Rican frogs sort of stay for about 3 minutes, and there's some weird ambient sort of effects in the background, and that transitions into the song "Miranda, That Ghost Just Isn't Holy Anymore." Uh, oh
Wait,
shit!
hang on one second.
I
Isn't
forgot to mention the story significance of Elvia.
Yeah, I was just about to say, isn't Elvia the stepmother of Francis? No, no,
No, no, no.
no.
Elvia is Francis's sister, and
The
Cygnus' aunt.
yeah the why did I think stepmother? Wait a minute.
You're insane.
No, 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 no. The aunt of Vismond
Yes.
and the sister of Francis. Okay.
Yes, that's Elvia. So Elvia was actually a witness to Francis's murder, but she managed to flee even though the church eventually found out and began to blackmail her to silence her. So eventually she ended up changing her name so she could hide from the church. And once Francis finds her, she spills everything to him. And she points him in the direction of Miranda, who is the next character in the story. Miranda is Elvia and Francis's mother and Cygnus's grandmother. Now, um, this song is kind of hard to decipher for me, but what I can understand from the lyrics presented is that Miranda knows what happened to her daughter, and she is trying to speak out about it and trying to bring attention to it, but nobody's listening because of the lyrics. When Miranda sang, everyone turned away, used to the noose they obey. That set of lyrics is very damning in that sort of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing with Miranda is that she knows what happened to Francis. She wants to speak out about it, and she begrudgingly gives the spiel to Cygnus because she doesn't really want to be around him because he's a drug dealer. But regardless, once this song is over, Cygnus feels he has enough information about what happened to his mother, and
And then I
we'll get to
believe
that in the
that
next song. But Miranda. Miranda as a song is essentially the calm before the storm. It is very mellow and very atmospheric compared to the rest of the songs on the album.
yeah, well said. That's definitely the best way of putting it. Though
Yeah,
um throughout Miranda that Ghost just isn't holy anymore, which keep in mind is 13 minutes. It's not like the entire thing
yeah,
is like a really slow build up. It does have like it's very dramatic moments.
mhm,
But that really only even builds up more tension as to like what's to come.
mhm,
Um and also isn't there a certain point in the story where he finally finds his mother only for her to be dead. Well, not like he discovers her and like he sees her and realizes that she's dead. No, but it's
right.
like he sort of just figures that out for himself.
We'll get
Really,
to that in Cassandra Gemini.
isn't like isn't Cassandra Gemini like probably the most like cryptic song here? It's the one that really well. Not only is it the song that just gets the most off the rail, it is the most batshit insane and cacophonous. It
Yeah,
is it is mental. This song, this entire piece, 32 minutes,
yeah. So
might I add.
If Miranda is the calm before the storm, then Cassandra Gemini is a goddamn hurricane.
Yeah, a much needed calm before the storm.
Yeah, because like Super Says Gamer mentioned, this song is 32 minutes. This song is longer than some albums, and it is, of course, it's my favorite song from the album. It is just fucking nuts how good this song is, and how like the composition and the amount of craftsmanship that went into this song alone is unmatched in prog music for me. I know you're going to disagree with this when I say this, but this is the best prog song I've ever heard.
Oh, dude, that's a hmm.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Well, for one,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Well, look, if I had to pick a favorite track off this album between the five, without picking Cassandra Gemini, because I'd
Yeah.
probably pick that one too. Um, I don't know. I'd probably say Elvia for its switch ups in tone and language,
Yeah.
maybe. A Cygnus, Visman, Cygnus. I mean, any of these tracks here are a contender, including Miranda that Ghost just isn't holy anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Cassandra Gemini, like being your absolute like favorite prog song ever. Let's say that's like a real that's like a real claim to make, let's just say.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard a
I mean
lot of prog music thanks to this guy, but I don't know, man. I don't think I've heard another one that just is this absolutely insane and I'm going to say it transcendent.
it is transcendent.
It is a transcendent song though.
No, I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
Um definitely like one of the best ways to just go out on an album.
Oh yeah.
But
Um
like out of all the prog music I've ever heard, I mean, still, I mean, I still have much to hear, but
yeah.
and this is way off topic, but
Yeah.
really the song that I've always held the closest to my heart, and it is kind of a basic bitch pick, is "Close to the Edge" by Yes.
Oh yeah, that's
That
probably that's probably like the second best prog song I've ever heard.
that song, like I'll keep it brief to just like one or two sentences. That song is a perfectly constructed musical adventure throughout like 18 minutes. It says just about as much within 18 minutes as Cassandra Gemini says in 32 minutes.
Yeah.
But both songs are the lengths that they are for a reason.
Yeah.
But you hear Close to the Edge, and you hear Cassandra Gemini, and both both tracks just completely fly by.
Mhm.
And once you realize that like half an hour had slipped past you, your mind that's where your mind is truly blown, you know?
Oh yeah.
That's where your
So,
mind becomes obliterated. I mean, the entire song, I mean, the entire track really, it is a face melt.
yeah, it is face melting, that's for sure.
face melting. You can hear you can feel your skin turning into goop and dripping before your chin.
Yeah.
Another thing, for this, like, because of how long this track is, and I you know what, I think the Mars Volta had issues with releasing this album the way, like with there being 5 tracks.
So the whole story behind this album's release is that Universal, the band's label at the time, did not want to release an album with just 5 songs on it. It didn't matter what the length of the songs were. They said, "You're not releasing this with 5 songs on it. Otherwise, if you do, we'll pay you an EP's rate instead of an album's rate." Cedric and Omar said, "Fuck that," and decided to split Cassandra Gemini up into multiple songs on the CD release. Now,
Yeah, but do you want to know what happened?
what?
Do you want to know what I think happened after that?
What?
I think if you were to, I'm pretty sure, like, based on what I've heard from other people, and either like downloading this album or whatever digitally,
Yeah.
the like if it splits up into like 12 tracks,
Well, it's
um,
not 12, it's like 8.
like all the tracks become like totally mixed up, and you can get lost in it, like
Yeah.
unintentionally. I mean, not like, and you end up hearing it not the way it's intended.
Yeah, it can be pretty easy to hear Cassandra Gemini out of order on the CD release or the streaming release.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
you could like hear like all. Well, I think actually, like, if you're ignoring like the album being split up into tracks, if you look at it as like the musical passages,
Yeah.
you could probably hear them out of order as well, and probably still not. You could it'll probably still sound just about the same, because
Right.
there's just so much that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely, it is immense. It is absolute, sublime, but it is, it's beyond words.
Yeah. I will say, if you're the split track issue is a non-issue if you have this album on vinyl, because all you got to do is switch the discs.
I mean, it is also like,
It's still
it is
split.
also
It's still split because Cassandra Gemini is 32 minutes, and there can only be like 25 minutes of music on one side of vinyl.
it's also thankfully not really an issue if you're listening to it on like Spotify per se or whatever.
Yeah. Or
But
this,
either
or if you
way,
just pop in the CD and just let it play for the entire thing.
but yeah, I mean, like, regardless of all of that, I mean, it's definitely interesting to hear these stories about how, people have heard this album completely out of order, and then much later on they realize, oh wait, this is not how it was meant to be heard. Well,
Yeah.
damn.
Yeah, so the story significance of Cassandra Gemini is that this is when the album reaches its climax. So the character Cassandra Gemini is a complete mystery for a lot of people. Personally, I like to believe that Cassandra Gemini is an alter ego, sort of split personality of Cygnus that manifested during his journey to find his mother. And once he gets the information that he wants from Miranda, specifically the names of the people who murdered Francis, he goes on a bloody, revenge-filled rampage and murders every single one of them.
That's probably the only. That's probably the best way that you can interpret a song like this.
Cassandra Gemini is incredibly cryptic,
Mm-hmm.
especially like the opening like spoken word bit after the intro with that weird ass vocal filter. Like I don't understand anything on what that's trying to say, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Hang on 1 second.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah.
There was a frail syrup dripping off his lap, danced lips.
There was a frail syrup dripping off his lap dance lapel.
At times, I actually find that funny.
It's an interesting filter. I'll give you that.
It's funny. I'm not
She
gonna
was a
lie.
mink hand job in sarcophagus heels. I think it's still kind of cool though, you know?
Yeah, but once you get past all of that, and you finally reach just the very end of the song, as well as the
No,
very end
there's
of the
no
album.
light in the darkest of your furthest reaches.
I I don't remember all the lyrics.
Nah,
But
that
once you make
when
it to
the album closes out with that last bit where the instruments are just going completely fucking ballistic, and Cedric is singing that repeating chorus, and then in the background you hear "No, there's no light, no, there's no time, you ain't got nothing, your life is just a lie." That is an orgasmic moment.
dude, totally out of body transcendence.
Yeah, and there's even like that's not even my favorite part of the song. My favorite part of the song is the 25 wives in the lake tonight bit where you can hear the trumpets and the all the instruments are just blasting you.
Again, I have to stress, dude, the saxophone on this track.
Oh yeah,
Like,
there's an entire section dedicated to an extremely technical saxophone.
and this is definitely where like the jazz fusion influence comes into play.
Mhm.
It just adds another layer of like chaoticness to it.
Yeah.
But I'd say once you make it past all of that and you finally reach just the very end of this huge adventure and this huge story, it pretty much makes a complete circle. It turns all the way back around and returns to the riff that you hear at the very start.
Yeah, sarcophagi.
And you're
Um
just like, well, damn.
Yeah. So, the here's the deal with the ending of the story. It is also pretty ambiguous. Some people say that none of it really happened and Cygnus was tripping balls on his own product of drugs. Some people say that it ends like this because Cygnus is distraught over the fact that his search for his mother ended up turning up nothing with her being dead. The second interpretation is how I personally interpret the album because the whole "it was all a drug-induced hallucination" part of the story just kind of feels anticlimactic to me.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, but
Now, there is
I
sort of
understand
one.
where people are coming from that interpretation, though.
Yeah, me too. Now there is one last track to mention here
Yeah,
that is actually not present in the track listing of this album. It's totally separate
it is the
from the
Francis the Mute
album,
title track.
right? And I think wasn't this track separated from the rest of the album because it just there was just no place to really fit it, like
Yeah,
fit
so
it
they
in
had
to
to
make it
they
feel
couldn't
cohesive.
release this album on two CDs because Universal told them no. So they had to put it on. They had to put the five tracks they already had wanted. They already wanted on the album on the CD, which totaled to 77 minutes. CDs can only hold 80, so they released Francis the Mute, the title track, as a separate single, and it is also a very important piece of the story. I'd say if you want to decipher some things. It
Dude,
talks.
come on, Universal, what are you doing?
Yeah, Universal was fucking stupid at this time.
What are
Anyways,
you doing?
what are you doing? Get
What
yourself
are you
together.
doing? Mamma
Anyways,
mia!
so the title track, Francis the Mute, very much describes the events of Francis the Mute's murder. You know, gutted at the nave, gutted and depraved. He tied a rope around her legs and let her hang for 7 days. Very brutal, by the way.
This whole story is fucked.
Yeah, no kidding. Um, and the outro lyrics.
Literally.
Yeah, that's dark. That's very dark. Um, so the outro lyrics on the Francis the Mute title track, "This never happened, but I saw you leave and crawl into a bed of broken windows." That could be where people are inferring the fact that this whole story was a drug-induced hallucination.
Hmm.
But I like to interpret it a different way, with uh, the idea that um, Cygnus never remembered or saw the events of Francis's murder, but he knows for a fact that something did happen to her, and I like to think that this a lot. Some people would put Francis the Mute right after Cassandra Gemini in the hypothetical track list. I would put it right at the start. So you know, it talks about Francis the Mute's murder, and then it delves into Cygnus's personal feelings towards being without a mother in his own personal life.
Dude, do you want to know what I think are some stories that are like really, really cool?
What?
I actually really do take interest in stories that are like
Mm-hmm.
told completely out of order.
Yeah.
And I mean as in like
Yeah.
Well, I don't totally mean something like, how the original Star Wars trilogy, it was all released after the first three episodes, like the prequel
Yeah,
trilogy.
yeah,
Um, like imagine that, but just even more all over the place.
yeah,
Um, it really only it probably makes it easier to follow along, but it's easier to it's fun to think about and just sort of put the pieces together. And that's like another thing about Francis the Mute. It it leaves you with just enough to come up with your own interpretation, but there's still extra pieces there,
yeah,
and there's no place to really put them, so the puzzle isn't ever truly complete.
yeah. Um,
And
dude,
I think that's the geniusness of that is the genius of Francis the Mute,
dude,
and just
could you imagine a movie based on this album? Telling the story in detail, like every little event. That would probably be one of the darkest and most depraved movies ever made.
no, I honestly, I mean that would be cool, but I'd still prefer to experience
Well,
the
yeah, of
story
course.
the
I
way
wouldn't.
it's.
I'm not saying I want a movie made based on Francis the Mute. I'm just saying, could you imagine if it actually existed and how fucked up it would be?
I mean, the movie itself better be pretty psychedelic, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, like the music video for The Widow, I think is a perfect like summation of how I imagine the album in my head, like with the events of it.
Now, as for the actual like album cover, like the cover and the artwork, I think all the artwork for this album is incredible as well.
Yeah, the
But
artwork and like the photography and all that for this album is amazing. It was done by Hypnosis and Storm Torgensen, who famously worked with Pink Floyd a lot.
Pink Floyd, Roger Waters,
My balls.
my balls. But anyway, okay, so yeah, question about the red, like the red hood over the face.
Yeah,
Wasn't that a result of Vismond being a failed abortion?
I believe
Like,
so.
didn't he become deformed, and so
Yeah.
he chose to keep this red bag over his face?
Well, actually, I don't know if that's like part. I don't know if you could infer that, but if that is actually the case, that's kind of cool. But then again, we see multiple people with this red bag over their heads in the artwork. Like on the front cover, there's one guy in another car that's outside of the guy that's in the car that we see on the album cover, and he's wearing a red bag too. And then in the liner notes, we see two people in the back seat of that car also wearing red bags.
Maybe it was all just a dream. Yeah, I mean, you never really know.
Yeah, who knows? Like we could talk about like all of that could mean and the story for hours, but I think we've already talked about it long enough, quite frankly.
I no, I actually think I'm burnt out of things to say about this. I'd say overall, this album, like if it's a 9, if not a 10. You know,
I have it
like
as a perfect 10 out of 10.
it's pretty much a 10 for me in my book as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think this album is perfect.
I don't know if it would. I don't know if it would fall into my top 5 all-time favorite prog albums,
Yeah.
but it is still very, very high up there.
Yeah.
It's a very brilliant work of art. Tells a really cool story,
Yeah,
and you should
I can't
definitely check it
imagine
out.
I can't imagine not having this album in my personal like pantheon of albums that I love.
Have,
This album changed the way I could view progressive rock.
yeah, man.
It's in my top 10. I own it on vinyl and CD, so that's how you know I love the hell out of it.
I'm going to eat your CD.
I'd probably buy this damn thing on 8 track if I could, but that was
No way. There's no
that
way
was
there's an 8 track for it.
I'm
No
no,
way.
I was just about to say it was never made. But if it existed, I'd probably fucking buy it.
Is there like
I
a cassette issue for it? That would be weird.
No, I don't think there's a cassette issue. I think it's just CD and vinyl and digital, of course. But um, yeah, Francis the Mute, absolute trip of an album, absolute masterclass of modern prog, an essential of modern prog. If you haven't listened to it, just stop listening to these two idiots and listen to it right now.
It's a classic, baby. Though I will say, I mean, it is still not. It's not the most accessible thing in the world, and you probably won't really even get it upon first listen.
Right.
Like at least for some people.
This episode
I
was a
mean,
bit all over the place, but then again, this album is a bit all over the place too.
yeah, and one last thing too, it is kind of a shame that we didn't really what happened to this band? It's not like they totally dipped. Like they didn't like oh no, they did disband. Damn.
Well, actually, they have been talking about reforming the band at a certain point.
Well, it really is a shame that we didn't get many other albums that were up to par with their first two.
I mean, I know that the drummer of the Mars Volta is now with Queens of the Stone Age, and I love Queens of the Stone Age. And of course, Cedric and Omar have their own projects and all that.
I think after really going in depth with this album with you, it's really piqued my interest in some of the other Omar solo work. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to be looking into that after this.
Oh yeah.
Thank you
Well.
guys so much for tuning in.
Oh yeah. Always appreciated.
And yeah, also if it's not like this isn't like a classic review. Like this isn't like a classic album review series or a sub series. Like we're not just going to be talking about acclaimed albums because I definitely have a lot of bad shit to get around to.
Yeah, we're not just gonna talk positively on a lot of stuff. Like if you saw the Pink Floyd tier list, I shat on a lot of things.
Yeah, man.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye.